Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and I hope you're having a good day. I'm really excited about today's special guest. Now, all of June we have been talking about phrases that we switch. I ultimately called switch the phrase. Now, every week we talked about a phrase that we switched, and the reason why it needed to be switched is because the enemy has come in and will try to switch what God has ultimately said about you, and he will try to find his way in just to take over our life. Now, the first week we talked about don't confuse a woe is me moment for a healing moment, and if you missed that week, go check it out. I'm the one that spoke on it and it is an awesome testimony of mine. And then the second week was Jessica. Jessica talked about her own testimony, and it's a question that us as Christians ask all the time. We always ask God, why me? We switched it around and God says, why not you? And if you missed that, you can go check it out. It was last week. Now this week, we are talking about something that the world will put on us and we will entertain, whether it's a title, whether it's a name, or whether it's just something that identifies us. And us as Christians, we have to realize that the world does not call us by name, but Jesus Christ himself will. So the world may say this about you, but God says this about you. And Dylan is going to be speaking on that. Dylan shares a testimony that if you do not know him, you will not realize where he has come from. And I do advise you to go look him up on his social media, because Dylan is in a place where he is learning so much and he can vomit information about something that you would have never thought he would have known. But he is so passionate in what he talks about. He's so passionate in what he stands for, and I'm really proud of him because he's come a long way and he will admit that, and especially in this video that he's going to share. So you guys check this out. He has an amazing story, an amazing testimony that shows that the world may call you something, the world may identify you as something, the world may look at you as something, but God looks at you as his daughter, as his son. God looks at you at the creation that he specifically molded. God looks at you with love and he looks at you with peace, and you are not to listen to what the world has to say. Check this out.
What I'm going to be talking to you guys today about is the world says this is who I am, but God says this is who I am. So I'm going to be speaking about identity and reaffirming yourself in the identity that God has given you, and not the identity that the world has given you, or maybe that you have even given yourself. And first, I want to start off by sharing a little bit of my testimony, because it's going to better help bring this point home and what it is that I have to share with you guys today. So for me, I grew up without a father. I grew up in a single parent home. I have an amazing mother, and she's always been an incredible mother who tried to raise us in a God-fearing Christian environment as much as she possibly could. We read Proverbs almost every single night, and we would restart it when the month was over at the end of the 31st chapter. But with that being said, as many of you guys know, it's not just enough to always hear the word or have someone who's sharing the word with you, or someone who believes in God, but ultimately you gotta have a relationship for yourself. And that's something that I was lacking. And in many ways, I compare myself to Doubting Thomas. You know, now Doubting Thomas, he gets a really bad rep. A lot of people use him as a story of who not to be like, and I totally understand that, absolutely. But ultimately, I look at Doubting Thomas a little bit more empathy, because I see myself in him. Doubting Thomas was someone who said, it's not enough that I hear that Jesus is risen. It's not enough that you tell me, or they come back and they say Jesus is risen. I got to experience Jesus for myself. Yeah, I know that he said he would do this, he said he was going to come back, but it's not enough. I got to experience Jesus for myself. In many ways, I think there's a lot of Thomas in many of us. And for me, I was able to identify with that because growing up, I heard about God. I heard about Jesus. I was raised in church, but for me personally, it wasn't always enough. I just didn't believe myself. And I remember because of this, there was so many negative words that was spoken over me growing up. Growing up without a father, many people can relate. people would say, oh, he doesn't have a father, so he's going to be angry all the time. And, well, he's going to act out because he doesn't have that male figure in his life, and he doesn't respect authority. And because of the words that were spoken over me, I began to identify with the negative words that were being spoken over my life. And so people would say these things, and I would believe it, and so I would walk in it. People would say, oh, well, you know, he's lashing out because he doesn't have a father. And then it would make me angry all the time. And then I had this problem with authority where I never wanted to listen. And so I spent much of my adolescence getting in a ton of trouble all the time. Always at odds with authority. Always felt the need to be the class clown and stand out for whatever reason. Because I was trying to find an identity. Because I didn't know my identity, I was attaching to the identity that the world had given me. And so I became this class clown. I became the guy that's like, oh, Dylan doesn't care about anything at all. He doesn't care. Like, Dylan's just savage, he's reckless. And I began to identify with these words that were spoken over my life. And I remember it got so bad that by the time I got to high school, I was getting suspended all the time. And my teachers were looking to have me expelled. And so I remember I was 15 years old. I got suspended for like the umpteenth time that year. And I had to go home. And as I'm home, I remember like laughing it off. And I remember actually going to a game that night. Like, our school had a game, I wasn't even supposed to be at it. I couldn't play in it. So I ended up going to a game that night, and I ran into a friend. And when I ran into a friend, I remember she was laughing like, hey, I heard you got suspended. Like, what did you do? And like, I was taking no responsibility for my own actions, being like, oh, you know, the school's tripping. Like, they kicked me out for this, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to have me expelled now. And I remember her laughing, and she looked at me, she says, man, Dylan, you're crazy, you're such a clown. And she said, I swear you're never gonna change. And I remember laughing like, hey, probably not, thinking that it was something to be proud of, that I built up this identity of being this reckless class clown, and oh, he's so savage and he doesn't care. And I remember just kind of laughing like, yeah, I probably won't, you're right. And I went home that night, and after I went home, I woke up the next day, and I got a call that my friend, the one I was just speaking to at the game, that she died in a car wreck at 16 years old. And I remember the moment she died, it woke my eyes up. It really just like, it was just it was just a moment. Like, it was the most sobering moment I'd had up until that point. And in many ways, it still holds up as that. It just hit me like, wow, like, you can really die at any moment. This life here on earth really is a blink of an eye compared to eternity. Like, we're not promised tomorrow. It doesn't matter if you're young and you have all this potential. You may never live to see the other side of that. And then I began to sit there thinking like, wow, in my room, I was blown away. Our whole town, it hit our whole town. I remember thinking like, who am I? What am I living for? Like, what good is it to have this identity of being this class clown and the guy who doesn't care, and oh, he's so reckless, he's so savage, whatever it might be. Like, what good is that identity? What good is that doing me? Like, if I die today, would I want to live with that identity? And I remember thinking like, wow, my friend, she died, she's gone. And at no point was the person I was, at no point in our relationship was the person that I was to her something that could have benefited her life or made her a better version of herself. At no point was I that to her. I was the comedic relief. I was the funny friend, the savage friend, the friend that you would go do reckless, wild stuff with. And I remember it just hit me. And I felt this rush of guilt, but also I felt like this urgency was on my heart. Like, I gotta do something. And I remember sitting there in my room, and for the first time, I had that moment like Thomas where I was like, I gotta experience God for myself. And I tried to talk to God, but I didn't hear anything. So then I opened up my Bible for like the first time ever, and I'm trying to read this King James English, and I don't understand it, like many people don't. And I'm like, what does this even mean? And so I talked to God again, and I'm like, look, God, if you're real, if you want to have this relationship with me, I need you to reveal yourself to me. Like, because I'm not getting it. And I looked back down, and I just turned my Bible to a random chapter, and I got to Genesis chapter 29. I read it to Genesis chapter 32. And I was reading a passage in between verse 22 and verse 32, where God is talking to Jacob. And Jacob, his name literally meant deceiver. And he lived up to the name and the identity that the world had given to him. And it's very important to point out, like in these days, in biblical times, your name was very much synonymous with your identity. And so for Jacob, his name meant deceiver, and he lived up to it. Like, I mean, he lied and he ripped his own brother off. He pretended to be his brother so he could get his brother's inheritance from his father. I mean, Jacob was a swindler. He literally lived up to what his name meant, which was deceiver. But then he had this moment with God, this coming to Jesus moment, and he's wrestling with God on the mountaintop. And in the midst of him wrestling with God, he gets a hold of him, and then he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And then God looks at him and says, he says, what is your name? And Jacob says, my name is Jacob. And then God says to him, no longer will your name be Jacob, for your name will be Israel, because you have wrestled with man and God, and you have overcome. See, the world said that Jacob was a deceiver. They said that, no, your name is deceiver. That's your identity. That's who you are. No, Aaron, you're a class clown. No, Aaron, you have no respect for authority. No, you are this, you are that. But God said, that's not who you are, Jacob. You are Israel. You are an overcomer. In the same way in that moment, it hit me, wow, God is speaking to me. All these negative things that have been spoken over my life, this identity that I attached myself to, God told me, you do not have to live up to the identity that the world has given you any longer. That identity is a fake ID. It's like being a 16-year-old kid trying to get in a bar with a fake ID. It is not valid. It does not exist. The rest of the world might be fooled by it, but I'm not fooled by it. And as long as you're trying to live up to an identity that was not for you, you're never going to be satisfied. You're always going to be trying to fill a void in your life. You're always going to be trying to find something next. You're always going to sacrifice permanent fulfillment for temporary satisfaction. In that moment, God told me, no longer will you be that class clown. No longer will you be that kid who has issues with authority, who doesn't listen, that's always getting in trouble. You will be an overcomer. You will be my son. And in that moment, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I'm like, wow, I think that I just spoke to God for the first time in my life. And I remember right there, I asked for God to have my heart, and I accepted Jesus into my life. And I remember going back to school that Monday. Mind you, I was coming off my suspension, and I was going back to school to get expelled. They were having a meeting to figure out what was the best plan for me once they expelled me, and if they wanted to send me to alternative school or to military school. And so I came back to school that Monday, and I was a completely different person because God had a moment with me on the mountain the way he did Jacob, and he changed my identity. So no longer was I the man that everyone thought I was. I no longer lived up to that identity. I was a new creature. I was a new being, and I was walking in my actual identity, the one that God had given me. And so I went to school that morning, and I remember being like, you know what? I'm just going to read my Bible out loud and see what happens. So I go to the lunchroom where everybody's eating breakfast, and I sit down, and I'm in the cafeteria, and I'm with my whole team. I'm with the whole basketball team. And I remember I just like opened the Bible, and everyone just looked, and they're like, what is he doing? They're like, what is he doing with the Bible in his hand? And I had that Bible in my hand, and in that moment, I was like, God, I don't know what's next. Like, you're gonna have to take it from here because I don't even know what to read. And I thought, maybe this is a bad idea. And so I just flipped to a random page thinking like, all right, God, if this is you gotta let me know now. And when I flipped to a random page, I turned to Ezekiel chapter 33, and I looked down at my page, and it says, you are the watchman of Jesus Christ. If I give you a word and you do not deliver it to the people, the blood will be on your hands. And that isn't the most pretty, that's not your pretty youth pastor scripture that he wants to give the students to attract them to the youth group. But for me, it spoke to me, and it's what I needed in that moment. And that's when I knew, all right, God, you're speaking to me right now. I don't want to miss another moment of what you're doing the way I did when my friend passed just 2 days ago. And so in that moment, I looked up and I started talking to every single person at that table about Jesus. And I started telling them how I was this different person, and I no longer had that identity that the world had given to me. And at first they're all laughing like, wait, is Dylan being serious? But slowly but surely, because I was living in the identity the world had given me, because I had bought into it because it was who I really was, everyone else had no choice but to do it too. And right there at that breakfast, I was able to lead 7 people to Christ. Over 7 teenagers were led to Christ right there at that breakfast. Even when everyone else isn't saying it, sometimes the enemy is ourselves. We're the one telling ourselves all these negative things. I can't start that business. I can't go finish and get this degree. I can't be a faithful husband, or I don't know how to be a father. I never had a dad before. I can't do this. I can't do that. And God's saying, I don't care what the world says about you. That's the identity that they've given you. Those thoughts in your head, that's the identity that you've given you. But that's not the identity that I have for you. When you accept the identity that I have for you, you'll begin to experience a level of fulfillment and purpose in your life that you never dreamed was possible. And so that's what I want to share with everyone today. The world may say this is who you are, but God says this is who you are. The world may say this is who I am, but God says this is who I am. Thank you.
Dylan, I appreciate you being so vulnerable. I appreciate you showing us where you came from and your mindset to move forward in the kingdom of God. You're doing a great job. You're doing an amazing job for standing in the gap for even this generation. You keep pushing, and I just pray that God sends you people your way to continue to keep you on that straight line. I love you so much and can't wait to see you guys next time. Y'all have a good day. Bye.